Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I love when this happens right before we're about to start the show. We've been planning the show and we get some breaking NBA news that torpedoes everything we're going to talk about. But I actually do genuinely love that. I'm not being sarcastic, Sap. It's really exciting when the NBA starts, firing on full cylinders, and we got that bombshell just a couple of minutes ago, courtesy of Adrian Wojnarowski and Shams, and that the Utah Jazz have traded Donovan Mitchell to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Coming back in return for Utah is Colin Sexton, who signs an extension with them. The lottery pick of the Cavs this year, Ochai Agbaji, Lauri Markkanen, and 3 first-round picks, all unprotected, and 2 pick swaps. So that is a large haul for Utah, especially when you consider what they got for Rudy Gobert earlier in this offseason. I believe it was 5 picks for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So that totals now 8 total picks and then 2 pick swaps. The draft board will be determined by Utah and Oklahoma City for the next decade, it seems like, Sap.
Yeah, it seems like Utah has 13 first-round picks between now and 2029, which Danny Ainge loves to do, right?
Wouldn't have it any other way, Danny.
Nope, he loves it. Imagine being in a fantasy league with him. It would be totally confusing, and he'd be trading first-round picks for this year, for next year, for 2029. We may all be dead by the time he gets all of the capital back from this Donovan Mitchell trade.
Sap, it was to keep track when he was the GM of the Celtics, like what picks they had, when they had them, what were the pick swaps. It was like you had to keep a dossier on it.
Well, I'm sure the league has multiple people that keep track of this, because it's not just Danny Ainge, it's also Oklahoma City. Other teams have done this. New Orleans has a bunch of picks from the Lakers, and these teams, this is what they do. They don't necessarily, some teams overvalue first-round picks. Other teams don't value them enough if they're in a win-now mode. So, yeah, Danny Ainge has a ton of picks. And it was a surprise because we never really heard that Donovan Mitchell would be going to Cleveland.
Right.
We constantly heard that he was going to the Knicks, but the Knicks, as they always do, managed to screw that up. The thing about this is Colin Sexton is a nice player, and it's kind of interesting because he was the 8th pick in the 2017 draft. That was the pick that the Celtics would have had if they didn't trade it to Cleveland for Kyrie Irving. So in some roundabout way, Danny Ainge finally has got Colin Sexton on his team 5 years after the fact.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So, Sap, again, we were hearing Knicks, and we're going to talk about how they kind of mishandled this, if you want to say that, or if you're not a Donovan Mitchell fan, I guess how they handle it appropriately. But first, Sap, what are your initial thoughts about him going to Cleveland, just in terms of the fit there and in terms of the return?
I just want to see what the fit is going to be with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, who was an all-star last year as well. It's a smaller backcourt, but those work in the NBA now. I mean, it's just a different league if you have 2 elite lead guards, because that's what I would call them. I mean, the whole notion of a point guard is kind of gone out of the league. I mean, Chris Paul is certainly the old school point guard, but there aren't a lot of those guys around now. So now you have guys that can handle, but can also score. Neither Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell are tall guards, but they're both sturdy guards, if you know what I'm saying. They're physical enough that they can hold their own on the defensive end. Neither's a great defensive player, but that's going to be an interesting backcourt going forward. It could really, really work together. It could almost be similar to what Dame Lillard and C.J. McCollum were in Portland, say, 5 years ago. That's how good this backcourt can be. We know that they have some talent up front, right, with Jarrett Allen, who I think is a really, really good player. Evan Mobley had an outstanding rookie year. So they've got talent now, Cleveland. So they'll be in play in the Eastern Conference. In terms of what you get back, Sexton's not Donovan Mitchell, but you got Lauri Markkanen, who's a nice player. You got this year's first-round pick that was a high pick that Cleveland selected. And then you've got all these future picks, and you see what happens with Cleveland. So right now, Danny Ainge just sits back and kind of roots against Minnesota and Cleveland going forward. And I think those 2 teams will be playoff teams this year. I don't think they'll be title contenders. So those picks going forward look to be high teen, low 20s, which is kind of a tough spot to be in. You know, you have to hit on some of those. And Ainge, that was kind of his soft spot, right? I mean, how many times did he have like the 14th or 15th pick in the first round and he didn't nail it? He seemed to be better late in the first round than he was in the middle of the first round. But, you know, we're going to have to see what happens. I kind of wanted to see Donovan Mitchell go to the Knicks to make them more relevant. But once again, Donovan Mitchell, the 21st best player in the league goes to like the 17th best team. It's an interesting move, but it doesn't necessarily shake the NBA. It's not going to alter the power structure in the Eastern Conference, because I still think it's Celtics, Milwaukee, Miami, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn are all better than Cleveland. But Cleveland might settle in nicely into that next level with the likes of Chicago and certainly the Atlanta Hawks now that they added DeJounte Murray in the offseason.
Yeah, so for Cleveland, it certainly makes them better. I don't think that you could say, losing those guys and adding Donovan Mitchell is anything but a net positive in terms of the quality of the team. Yeah, I agree. It doesn't vault them to Boston, Miami, Philadelphia, Brooklyn territory, Milwaukee, depending on if Miami regresses a little bit based off of the age of some of their players. But I guess if you're Cleveland, you're banking on Mobley, after our outstanding rookie year, continuing to improve and potentially being, an all-star level player. And then you're talking about having 3 all-stars on your team. And Jared Allen is another guy who's an all-star. So actually it'd be 4 all-stars on your team. And then, so, they're young enough where you can see the vision of a team building towards something. So I get it from their perspective. I think it makes sense. They should be a perennial playoff team now. The picks that they're sending, Sap, just to add extra details, 3 unprotected picks are in 2025, 2027, and 2029. The pick swaps are in 2026 and 2028. So those are all, pretty down the road picks. Woj adds this: along with the Rudy Gobert trade with Minnesota, Utah has gathered 13 unprotected or very lightly protected picks through 2029.
Yeah, Danny Ainge is going to have a blast, right? And he's in his early 60s, so this should keep him busy till he's in his late 60s with all these draft picks, see how he nails them. And I would look at Donovan Mitchell being quite pleased with this, because I would think that he's improving his lot here. Now, we can argue about what's better, the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference, but I think this is the best roster he's been on in his career in talking about high-level talent. Rudy Gobert in Utah, and then a lot of nice role pieces, right? Mike Conley, but Mike Conley, I think, was a little past his prime when he got to Utah to play with Donovan Mitchell. Now he's playing with another all-star in Darius Garland, who's very young and is ascending. And then those 2 bigs are both all-star caliber players. Jared Allen was an all-star last year. Yep. Evan Mobley is trending in that direction. I've compared Evan Mobley to a young Chris Bosh. That's a pretty good player, right? So you're talking about 2 really good, versatile bigs in Allen and Mobley, an outstanding backcourt with Mitchell and Garland. The only missing piece right now for Cleveland is if they can go out and get a wing, someone who can, score threes, defend. I don't know, maybe somebody like LeBron James.
Go get him.
Go back to Cleveland. Yeah, I mean, that would be a perfect fit. I'm sure he's looking at this now going, interesting. Maybe I end my career in Cleveland with those.
It's a better roster than the Lakers. It is a better roster.
Hell yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
They don't have the top end talent, but
well, Anthony Davis. I mean, that's the only one. But if you were drafting, if you took LeBron out of the equation, maybe Anthony Davis would be the next pick of the 2 teams. And then the next 4 picks would be from Cleveland, right? It would be Mitchell, absolutely, Garland, Mobley, and Allen. So, maybe LeBron's looking at this and going, maybe I should have held off on that extension. But I think he's happy in LA. I don't think he's going back to Cleveland. But if they could get a wing type player, and maybe someone even different than LeBron, but a good 3-and-D guy, an Andrew Wiggins type player who's not available, but that type of player who can shoot threes and defend and be a versatile player, I think Cleveland then could vault into that same stratosphere with the likes of the Celtics and Miami and Philadelphia and Brooklyn and the top teams, obviously Milwaukee as well in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. What they do have is Isaac Okoro, who was, a high pick 2 years ago, 5th overall pick, has dealt with some injuries in the NBA. Maybe they're still high on him, hoping that he, can ascend. In his 2 years in Cleveland, he's averaged about 9 points a game, just under 2 assists and 3 rebounds. So nothing spectacular. I think a lot of people maybe look at him as a better 6-man or role player. I mean, when you drafted 5th overall, you're hoping you're going to be an all-star player. It doesn't look like he's going to be that, but perhaps with a little of scoring pressure off of him, he could develop into a 3-and-D guy, maybe not Andrew Wiggins level, but at least I'm saying, I see the vision for Cleveland. Will it work out to the point that they're a championship contender? I have my doubts, but if I'm a Cleveland fan, I'm definitely excited about this move. I'm not looking forward to the 2029 draft. I want to have Donovan Mitchell on my team. That's a sure thing. Who the hell knows what 2029 draft's going to look like, where you'll be drafting. So I like this move for Cleveland, and for Utah. They're they tore everything down to the ground, to the studs. So it's going to be a rough couple of years in Utah, but that's the only way they could acquire talent, Sap. We've talked about this before, and it's been talked about for years with Utah. They can only acquire talent via the draft. That's the only way it's doable.
Yeah, that's the only way. I mean, free agents aren't going to Utah unless they're second or third tier free agents who are, closer to the end of their career and think that Utah is a place you can win a championship. That role may be reserved now for Cleveland. I think there's going to be veteran players that look at Cleveland and go, interesting, they're doing some really good things there. You got young players, versatile players, maybe a veteran can fit in and be a missing piece in Cleveland.
Mitchell seems well liked amongst the players in the league too, wouldn't you say, Seb?
Absolutely. And I think he's someone that the players gravitate to. He's a winner, that type of player. I think he's a guy that is a popular player in the league. So this is a good move for Cleveland. Like you said, Utah's doing what they're doing. And maybe Utah's starting backcourt, depending on how soon Colin Sexton comes back, as he missed most of last year with that knee injury. You might have Danny Ainge and Dwayne Wade in the backcourt, right? Because Ainge is the president of basketball operations and Dwayne Wade is a minority owner. So maybe they'll roll those two guys out there to try to draw some fans into Utah.
Whatever Dwayne Wade paid for that minority stake in the Jazz today, it looks like he paid too much for that. It's gonna be a lean few years in Utah, Sap. I gotta believe.
Well, Mitchell's favorite player was Dwayne Wade, right? Growing up, and they're often compared. I mean, Wade is better than Donovan Mitchell, Wade in his prime, but similar type players. Not necessarily the most efficient scorers, but tough, hard-nosed guys that can score in multiple ways and kind of have that same vibe about them. And now Dwayne Wade owns whatever percentage of the Utah Jazz, and their value's gone down a little bit. But Danny Ainge is certainly going to keep us busy for the next 6 years with all these draft picks. And he's probably not done yet. I still think if there's a move during the season, if Kevin Durant's back on the table or Kyrie Irving's back on the table, you're going to see Danny Ainge with all those draft picks and all these players maybe be the guy who facilitates a trade as a third team.
Oh, absolutely. He's always going to be hunting for more picks, more assets. That's how he operates. What I find interesting too about what Utah's done here is that they're not solely banking on the draft picks. They, like you mentioned, Colin Sexton, but they've made a couple of interesting moves. They got Talen Horton-Tucker, and we're going to talk about that Lakers trade in just a little bit. So they're taking, flyer on him, young player, 21, see what he can do with a little bit more playing time. They got Walker Kessler in the trade with the Timberwolves, who was a rookie, so he was their pick this year, and they just got, like you mentioned, Sap, the last pick in the lottery, Ochai Agaj. I'm sorry, I'm just butchering his last name, but from Kansas, he was the most outstanding player in the Final Four. Mm-hmm. So they're also acquiring young players and say, okay, well, we're not winning, so maybe they'll hit on one of those guys too. So I think that Ainge has done a good job here in terms of saying, we're going to get our picks, sure, but you're also going to give us a young player that we're interested in at least scouting and giving playing time to and seeing what develops. So it sort of doubles their odds of being successful in a trade, I guess.
Right, and they still have their own picks. So if they go 24-58 and they win the lottery, they'll get the first pick in the draft, and we'll see which player is available next year. But at least they have their own picks as well. If they can finish with one of the top three picks, we've seen that Ainge has nailed those when he nailed Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. He's done pretty well at the end of the first round. In the middle of the first round, again, he's had some issues there. But I think the biggest story with this happening today, Jet, Mitchell going from Utah to Cleveland, is what the hell did the Knicks do wrong and screw this whole thing up? Because it looked like it was there on a silver platter for them to get Donovan Mitchell. He wanted to go there. Obviously, they wanted him. It would have been one of their biggest moves in the last 2 decades, and they screwed it up like the Knicks always do.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed, Sap, like for months, this was a fait accompli. Okay, we know Donovan Mitchell wants to go to the Knicks. He's from New York. The Knicks have their own picks. They have a couple of intriguing young players. It seemed like a perfect fit. But the Knicks kept balking at what Danny Ainge was asking for. And now we know this. We've talked about this many, many times, Sap, throughout Danny Ainge's tenure as the head of the Celtics, that he tries to bleed you completely dry, and what his asks are in trades are oftentimes completely unreasonable. And I understand that you need to be trepidatious when you're dealing with him, but the Knicks have not been able to get any sort of positive momentum for more than a season's worth of momentum since the 90s, Sap. And Mitchell is a popular player. He would have been a hometown hero coming back. He would have given some juice into the franchise that desperately needs it. And like you said, they kind of screwed it up. The Cavs were more than willing to meet the asking price, obviously, and the Knicks are left empty-handed with an extension for RJ Barrett, who I like as a player. I don't know if he's ever going to be as good as Donovan Mitchell. I don't think so. And so the Knicks are basically where they were last year, except for the biggest fish that was on the market, who should have gone to the Knicks, is now a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that's in your conference. And you are so far behind those top teams, and now you're behind those secondary teams too. So, okay, great. You have all your own draft picks if you're the New York Knicks, but you're not bad enough where they're going to be really great picks. And you're certainly not good enough where you're going to even be talking about competing to get out of the first round of the playoffs.
You look at RJ Barrett, right? I mean, is he as good as Colin Sexton? I think you could make a case that he is. He's a little bigger, a little younger. So you can make a case that he's better than Colin Sexton. I don't think he'll be as good as Donovan Mitchell. But RJ Barrett was supposed to be the centerpiece of a potential trade with the Knicks in Utah. Why didn't they execute that? Why didn't they trade RJ Barrett with some secondary pieces and then those 5 draft picks and get this thing done? From what we understand, Barrett signed a 4-year, $120 million extension on Monday. Leon Rose, the general manager of the New York Knicks, or the president of basketball operations, they get more layers there than you could even, than Saturn has around its ring, or Jupiter, or whichever one of the planets has a lot of rings.
Saturn has a ring.
Saturn.
Right.
See, I was right the first time. See,
you were very good.
I used to like that stuff when I was like 7, and then I got older and stopped following it. But they just couldn't execute it, right? And the craziest thing from earlier in the week is after the RJ Barrett 4-year, $120 million extension, is that we find out this is the Knicks' first draft choice to sign a second contract with the team since Charlie Ward in 1999. He was drafted in 1994. So the Knicks can't get free agents, right? Because remember in 2010, I really thought LeBron was going to the Knicks. And then he went to Miami, right? They're always in on free agents, but they never get anyone. I mean, the biggest free agent they've signed in the last 20 years is probably Amari Stoudemire.
Right? Yes, without a doubt, he's the biggest free agent they've signed.
And he was kind of on the back 9 when they signed him.
He was option number 4, Sap. Remember that summer? It was Wade, Bosh, LeBron were all free agents. And then Amari was kind of, he was still a great player, but he was certainly the 4th option in that field.
So they got Ringo, right? I mean,
they got Ringo. They got
McCartney
Ringo.
and Lennon and Harrison went to the Heat, and the Knicks got Ringo. So that's kind of what happens. So they never get free agents, right? And Stoudemire at that point, again, was on the back 9. He'd had some knee problems in Phoenix, so he wasn't necessarily what he was in Phoenix. He still had a good few years in New York. And then
his first year was really good, and then it kind of went downhill.
Yeah, and then the injuries caught up. And then remember the year they signed like 9 power forwards, like Julius Randle was signed, and everyone. And Randle had one
Taj
good year
Gibson,
at the Knicks.
Yeah,
Taj Gibson, exactly.
Every power forward.
Every power forward. Yeah, they were going to sign all the power forwards, corner the market on power forwards. So they can't sign free agents. And then you look at their draft record, they're never quite bad enough to get like the first pick in the draft. They have no luck in winning the draft lottery, at least since, they got Patrick Ewing in 1985. So what's their best draft choice been over the last 15 years? I mean, is it Porzingis? And then they traded him to Dallas, shortly into his career. So
might be Barrett now.
Might be RJ Barrett, yeah, who I think is a nice player. And I, put it in my mind that Cam Reddish they acquired from Atlanta. They had RJ Barrett. They were going to just make this big move on Zion Williamson. Well, he re-upped with New Orleans. So it's like the Knicks are irrelevant, and yet they remain the most valuable franchise in the NBA. But that whole Charlie Ward thing is like Charlie Ward won the Heisman Trophy in 1993. You were like 4 years old when Charlie Ward won the Heisman Trophy. Wasn't drafted in the NFL. Was drafted by the Knicks. Had a nice career. Signed a second contract with the Knicks. That's the last time they signed their own draft choice to a second contract. That's over 20 years ago. And since 1999, they've won 1 playoff series. And yet here it is. Donovan Mitchell's there on a silver platter, and they screwed it up.
Right, especially considering their draft track record, Sap, you'd say they should be more than willing to give up draft picks for Donovan Mitchell. Say, hey, we're not good at this. Take away. Then we have no pressure on us to draft guys that are good. You have all of our picks. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And I would think, too, all it would take for New York to acquire free agents is to have some semblance of stability and a star-ish level player, which Donovan Mitchell was. So I feel like that was just the first move. You get Donovan Mitchell, you have him in the fold. Suddenly the team is a little bit more attractive to other players. You can start bringing in guys. Now you got nothing. Again, I'm not trying to dump on RJ Barrett. I think he's a fine player. I don't know if he'll ever be an all-star, maybe once or twice in his career. He's not a guy that you build a team around. I don't think anybody has any imagination that that's the case.
No.
And they're so far behind these teams that are contending, Sap. And that's been the case with them since, what was the last year they're in the finals? 1998?
99, and they
99.
lost to San Antonio, and that was the shortened season.
So
And before that, it's been over 20 years.
Almost a quarter century, Sap.
Yeah, Tom Brady was getting ready to go into his senior year at Michigan the last time the Knicks, advanced to the finals or conference finals. They've won one playoff series since 1999, and that was against the Celtics in 2013. And
no one thought they were going to make a finals run that year. I'm saying the last time that they were actually competitive for a championship was that year they were they were an 8 seed that year, weren't they?
They were an 8 seed. Yeah, they somehow went through, and San Antonio swept them. Right. So it was a one-sided series. So really the last time you'd go into a season saying, oh, well, the Knicks are going to contend this year was in the mid 90s with Ewing, Oakley, Mason, a real, like a football team, but, made it to the finals in 94 and lost in 7 games to the Houston Rockets. And, I get it that they couldn't break through because Jordan was dominating the Eastern Conference. So be it. But yeah, I mean, at least then they had memorable series against Indiana or Chicago, right? They had beaten the Celtics in 1990. So they had some traction there. But really, since they've done nothing, and every time they try to do something, they just mess it up. RJ Barrett, to me, his absolute ceiling is DeMar DeRozan. Does that make any sense? Like, that's his absolute ceiling, which is a really nice player, but I don't even think he'll reach it. Right. But he's gotten better every year. He's been in the league, 3 years in the league, getting better. Not a real great 3-point shooter, but I don't think he'll ever make an all-star team. DeRozan has made several all-star teams, but to me, that's his absolute ceiling. That's if everything breaks his way.
Sap, put yourself in the shoes of the worst job in the NBA and that you're working for the New York Knicks, and you've got to explain this to your fan base. Now, how do you sell this to your fan base? How do you sell the New York Knicks vision to your fan base right now?
You can't, because do you go back to your fans and say, well, Danny Ainge wanted too much? The average fan is like, who cares? Give them the draft picks. They wanted Donovan Mitchell.
Absolutely. I mean, that they play the media game where they're going to leak something, about the Jazz were asking for too much and stuff like that. But I don't see a way that any of their fans buy it.
They've got a great fan base, but it's a fan base that is frustrated, right? I mean, just remember 2 years ago when they finally made the playoffs and they played Atlanta in the first round and lost in 5 games. Madison Square Garden was electric. It was great. Julius Randle made 13 All-NBA, and everything was going great. Stephen A. Smith was at the games, getting excited. It was fun. You want to see that with the Knicks, right?
Spike Lee was enjoying himself,
there.
Right?
Yeah, it was great. So, and I want to see that, but here's the thing too: is people always say, "Well, the league is better when the Knicks are good." Well, the league has just grown incredibly, and the Knicks haven't been good. Like, the league is great because of the stars, whether they're playing. Look, LeBron's played in Cleveland. Harden has played in Oklahoma City and Houston.
Yeah.
Durant's played in Oklahoma City. Yeah, Giannis, the best player in the world, is playing in Milwaukee. I mean, what the hell were the Golden State Warriors till Steph showed up? So, I mean, it's not, the Bulls haven't been good since Jordan left, and the league's doing quite well. So, and look, the Lakers have had one really good team in the last 10 years, and the league's still growing. Yes, it would help if the Lakers were more relevant because they are the marquee franchise, and they do still have the face of the league and LeBron James. But yeah, I mean, if you're the Knicks, just do what you have to do to get Donovan Mitchell, get that buzz. And again, even that,
Sap, at least the Lakers are interesting. They're in the news constantly because, they have different things, sometimes it's a sideshow, but at least they're doing things that are, somewhat intriguing. What do the Knicks have the most boring roster in the league, Sap, if you look at it right now?
Yeah, led by a coach who feels like he should be coaching football instead of basketball, right?
I just don't see anything there that makes sense in terms of getting a fan excited or being like, okay, New York Knicks basketball is coming back. Like, when?
Yeah, no, there's nothing exciting there. Right. No, Julius Randle's their best player, RJ Barrett, nice players, but they're not as good as Donovan Mitchell. Tom Thibodeau, it's kind of a defensive plotting style, which I don't think that's going to attract free agents either. So, yeah.
No, and he lasts at 2-3 years at places, right, and then he wears out his welcome. It's
exactly
it's the same thing with him.
Yeah. So I don't see how the Knicks recover from this. And even Donovan Mitchell is as good as he is. Again, the 21st best player in the league. now goes to Cleveland, where I think they've got better pieces for him to excel than if he had gone to the Knicks. I think Donovan Mitchell, other than wanting to play for the Knicks, is going to be happy in Cleveland because he's got an all-star in the backcourt in Darius Garland and two emerging big guys in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. I mean, that's a really those four guys, they can play and they'll
yeah,
compete.
and they have a great fan base when they're
Yep.
into it in Cleveland, and you're out of just snow white Utah, which
True.
I'm sure is not the preferred destination for a lot of young black athletes to be living. So better city in Cleveland in terms of lifestyle. So yeah, I'm sure he's happy. Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean he'll contend with Cleveland again. They had the best record in basketball a couple of years ago, and then they were upset by the Clippers in the second round. He's had some injuries as well. He's not a real big guard, so at times he's going to have to deal with some injuries. He's about 6'1". He's strong, but he's just not as big as some of these other elite players in the league. But he's an outstanding player, he's an all-star. But I think in the end it worked out better for Donovan Mitchell going to Cleveland rather than New York. Although I know he wanted to go to New York, he's from that area. I grew up a Knicks fan, but hey, his dad works for the Mets, and they've got a chance to win the World Series, so he can root for the Mets from afar.
All right, and he could have been wearing the same colors as the Mets if the Knicks didn't
yes
that. But
yeah.
This is the real world we live in, where the Knicks aren't going to do something that's a good basketball decision. It's just not happening. Sorry to Knicks fans who are listening to this. It's just nothing's getting better there. Another trade that happened, Sap, involving the Utah Jazz was one we mentioned very briefly a couple of minutes ago, and that sent Patrick Beverly to the Los Angeles Lakers in return for Stanley Johnson, who did some nice things for the Lakers last year, and Timothy Horton Tucker, who has been long coveted by Lakers fans as this great young prospect. And so two youngish guys, and you get the veteran Patrick Beverly. The obvious storyline here is Patrick Beverly and Russell Westbrook have had a lot of issues with each other over the years. They're both very combustible players. Now they're in the same backcourt. You're a Lakers fan, Sap, because LeBron is there. What do you think of this trade?
I think it's a good trade for the Lakers because they had to get a veteran presence, and Beverly is a guy who is an irritant, right? And that's what the Lakers need. They needed some defensive presence, which he'll provide as a perimeter defender. You can also shoot threes. When the Lakers won the title a couple of years ago, it was LeBron, Anthony Davis, both healthy, both playing at a high level, and then a bunch of other guys that defended the three and hit the three. Well, Beverly does that. That's something they didn't have last year. Certainly, they don't have it in Russell Westbrook, who can't even shoot free throws, let alone three-pointers. Look, like you said, the Lakers are still interesting because they have LeBron and Anthony Davis, and then this dynamic with Westbrook and Patrick Beverly is going to be fascinating, provided Westbrook is still on the team when we start the season. And it's looking more and more like that's what's going to be the case. I don't know how the Lakers can move off of Russell Westbrook. And, remember,
especially now that Mitchell trade just happened, Sap, because that was being looked at as a clearinghouse for Westbrook, right? Was the Jazz.
Yep. And Ainge is up for anything. And then that's not going to be the case now. Did the Knicks in response say, well, Russell Westbrook could provide some juice for us? But the Knicks fans are too smart for that. That would last for about 2 weeks, and then they'd realize that Russell Westbrook isn't very good anymore, and they'd turn on him as well. I think it's a good move for the Lakers because Beverly is a guy who can defend and can hit the three, and that's what you need with LeBron and Anthony Davis. Once again, LeBron brings in a guy who's been an irritant, and Patrick Beverly's been one of those guys. Remember years ago, was it Lance Stevenson who played in Indiana, was an irritant to LeBron and ended up playing with LeBron in Cleveland. LeBron's very good at understanding, keep your friends close, your enemies closer. And he's got that type of ability. So I think Beverly will certainly help the Lakers. We'll see how it meshes with Russell Westbrook in the backcourt. But like you said, the Lakers are infinitely interesting, even if dysfunctional.
The interesting thing, is the mix of personalities, and now Patrick Beverly, has done the media car wash this offseason, and he's a very, he's an entertaining guy. I love him on the court because I love those sort of gritty defensive players. He's definitely confident. He thinks he's way better than he is, which I'm wondering. All the talk is about him and Russell Westbrook because they've gotten into spats before, and they're two sort of alphas and stuff like that. There was a comment, Sap, and I'm sure you've seen this too, early in this offseason when Patrick Beverly was on one of the shows on ESPN, I think it was, and he said that the Lakers would have won the championship if he was on the team, this same roster. So exactly what he's on right now, because he said he would be willing to call out LeBron or Russell Westbrook when they did something wrong. Would LeBron respond to something like that? Is that a realistic thing?
No, I mean, the Lakers were 33-49 last year. Does Patrick Beverly think he's worth 15 games?
Apparently.
On his own? I mean, I don't think there's a player in the league worth 15 games with the possible exception of Giannis, who we both agree is the best player in the sport. Like, no, I mean, he's going to help. He's going to call out LeBron James. All right, good luck with that. LeBron's going into his 20th year. He's at worst the second greatest player in the history of the sport. And he still averaged 30 points per game last year. He just didn't play enough. Neither did Anthony Davis. Like, who's calling out Anthony Davis? I think that's the guy that might need to be called out more than LeBron James at this point.
I don't know if he'd respond well to that, Anthony Davis. Do you think he's the personality to be, dog?
No, he'd go into a shell probably. And I think LeBron knows how to handle him. LeBron can, kind of push him enough to get on him to make sure that he's all on board, but without damaging him. I learned this a long time ago that you have to, with the younger generation, and I'm 59 years old, but I like to consider myself part of the younger generation, the compliment sandwich, right? You give a compliment, then the criticism, and then you end with a compliment. So the first and last thing that the person hears is a compliment. The criticism is in the middle. That's what you do. And I think LeBron probably understands how to do that because he's got two sons. One who's going to be a senior in high school and another who's going to be a sophomore in high school. And they're both
they're in the cover of Sports Illustrated, Sep.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, has there ever been a family with the father on the cover so many times and now his two sons? There was Griffey and Griffey Jr., Barry and Bobby Bonds, but I don't know about two sons to go along with the dad. But
the Hulls? How many Hulls were there?
Oh, yeah, that's true. There were 3 Hulls. Yeah. That's a good point, actually. And the Boones, but that was more generational. You had, let's see, Aaron Boone and Brett Boone were the sons, and the father was, oh God, what was his name? He was a catcher. Their dad was a good catcher, good defensive catcher with the Phillies and Angels. So that's that. But this is
rare.
It's rare, especially when you're talking about,
and it's never happened in basketball.
No. It's because basketball's a newer sport too, than say baseball, which has so much generational background to it, and hockey as well. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I think that Anthony Davis wouldn't respond necessarily to that. He might go into a shell. Westbrook might start a fight with you if you start to call him out. Like that's going to be a tough.
Oh, we know he doesn't respond well to that. I mean, he doesn't respond to tweets about that stuff.
No, he doesn't. No, he's ready to fight everybody, and Darvin Ham's going to have his hands full as a first-year head coach with that group, and they're not done. I'm assuming they're going to try to add some pieces here. They need more 3-point shooting and more defense to go along with the players they have right now.
I look at it sort of as with Anthony Davis and Patrick Beverly or whatever. Is that this? Remember a few years ago when Jimmy Butler was on the Timberwolves? Jimmy Butler's obviously a better player than Patrick Beverly. He was so in your face and stuff like that. And Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins did not respond well to that. And they sort of regressed. And then when he left, they kind of each player got better. Now we've seen how successful Wiggins was as a member of the Warriors. Karl Anthony Towns had maybe his best statistical year last year. So it can have a negative effect too. You need to have really the right player to respond well to that sort of criticism. And I don't think Patrick Beverly knows Anthony Davis if he thinks that is or LeBron if he thinks that that's a good strategy. He does some things that are really well. Like you said, he shoots the 3 decently. He's an excellent defender when he wants to be. But he's got to, it's the same thing with Westbrook, Zap. You got to they're looking for him to fill a specific role, not be the captain of the team, not be the leader of the team, play defense, shoot threes. That's all they want him to do. I don't know if he's capable of going to a team like the Lakers and just saying, okay, I'm just going to do 2 things. That's it.
Well, use the Bill Belichick, phrase of do your job. Like you're here to defend and hit threes. That's why the Lakers won 2 years ago, because they had guys that understood that, right? KCP. Okay, I'm going to hit threes. I'm going to defend. Caruso. I'm going to hit threes. I'm going to defend.
Rondo was facilitate. That was it.
Rondo facilitate. LeBron do everything like he always does.
And do it, LeBron. You do the rest.
You do the rest. You can pretty much handle anything. He's, I've often said that LeBron is to basketball what Prince was to music. Like he just could play any instrument, could write songs. Yeah, write songs, dance, sing, produce a hell of a movie in Purple Rain, do it all. But I think that's a great point, Jet. And again, LeBron's the leader. So it's like Patrick Beverly understanding your role. I think sometimes the Celtics run into this with Marcus Smart. And Marcus Smart's a slightly better player than Patrick Beverly. He's younger, he's more in his prime. But at times it's almost like, Tatum's the one, Brown's the two, and the rest of you guys kind of fill in. I'm worrying about Grant Williams turning into that guy who, during timeouts is in Jason Tatum's ears. There's going to be a point where Jason Tatum just turns to him and says, "Shut up." I mean, I think that's already happened.
Right.
And we know
can't
Tatum
do anything better than me.
Right. Like I could play this game better than you left-handed with a broken bone in my left hand, and I'm still better than you. And at some point, and we know Tatum's a pretty docile guy, but imagine trying to do this with Westbrook, who's like, 180 degrees difference than Tatum.
I'm saying now the Lakers have two of those guys, right?
You've got two crazy guys.
Who it's not just that they're crazy, but that haven't shown an ability to say,
right,
I'm going to just do this. Westbrook is a different case because he still thinks he's an MVP. Beverly, obviously, he said he thinks he's worth 15 games, which is insane, but he's been a role player for virtually all of his career. So I think he at least has a better sense of it. But you do have two guys who are just kind of delusional about their abilities at this point in their career.
Yep.
Maybe it will work, but it's certainly interesting.
Oh yeah, the Lakers are always fascinating. Hell, they were 33 and 49 last year, and every national show led with the Lakers. I mean, he's still most talked about team in the league. Even though
it's
were a train wreck. Yeah, I mean, it's like the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys, everyone talks about, and although they went 12-5 last year and had a good year, but that's the team everyone talks about in the NFL. Same thing with the Lakers in the NBA, especially when you get LeBron on the team.
Yeah, it should be fascinating. I do think overall, Sap, if I'm a Lakers fan, I think it's a net positive trade. You trade two guys that, were fine. I don't know how long. Stanley Johnson was out of the NBA last year before the Lakers picked him up. THT, I think maybe he'll be an okay 7th or 8th guy. And you got a guy that should be able to contribute every night. So I think that's certainly a good thing for the Lakers. So I think it's a good trade for them. It's just personality-wise, it's just a really interesting one. And we are almost out of time, Sap. Really quickly, we have about 2 minutes left, but rumors about Celtics come in and Carmelo Anthony potentially signing with Gallinari out now. I wouldn't put too much stock into that. I don't think the Celtics particularly like Carmelo's skill set. What do you think, Sap?
No, we don't even need 2 minutes to detail that. It's a no. Wait till Gallinari comes back in a couple of months. And in the meantime, give more minutes to Sam Hauser. It's going to be October, November, and Gallinari will be back around Thanksgiving. And then you go from there. Yeah,
I mean, I think Carmelo's done a nice job towards the end of his career now being that kind of scoring guy off the bench. Last year was essentially with the Lakers, he was asked to do too much because of all the injuries and stuff like that. He was good on the Blazers the year before. It's just not at all what the Celtics are looking for. He's not really a 3-point shooter. They would want a 3-point shooter. He doesn't play any defense. It's just not a fit that I think is going to happen. So I don't see that happening, but lots of big news in the NBA today. So plenty more to talk about when we come back next week for our show, breaking it all down, seeing what other dominoes fall. Like you mentioned, Sap, maybe New York has to overcorrect for this. We'll see what happens there. But we'll be back on the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap next week. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. And you can go to Full Press Coverage and check out all the great podcasts and articles, some by John Sapichetti on there. And we will talk to you later, everybody. See ya.